US President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping will have their first in-person meeting in a year on the sidelines of the APEC Summit. The two leaders will sit across the table in a perfectly choreographed meeting in San Francisco later tonight. The meeting comes amidst tensions between the two powers that have pushed ties to an all-time low, from spy balloon escapades to aggression in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. China has been Biden's nightmare in recent times. In a run-up to this much-anticipated meeting, US and China have been engaging in high-level official interactions in recent months, including a visit by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi to the US this year. US Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken have also visited China. In terms of outcomes, there may be nothing to waltz home about, but there may be a thaw in the somewhat frosty US-China ties.
Get back on a normal course of corresponding, being able to pick up a phone and talk to one another if there's a crisis, being able to make sure our military still have contact with one another. We can't take, as I told you, we're not trying to decouple from China, but what we're trying to do is change the relationship for the better.
I'm not going to preview what exactly President Biden will say to President Xi, because I think he should have the opportunity to speak to him directly in person without me proclaiming it from the podium. I will say that the president, broadly speaking, is going to set out a vision for peace and stability and the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The United States has been ready for that entire period to sustain military-to-military communications because we think it's the only responsible thing to do. Having our two militaries in communication is the way you reduce mistake, you avoid escalation, you manage competition so it doesn't veer into conflict. That to us is an absolutely straightforward factor, and no matter what else is happening in the relationship, those military-to-military links should remain intact. That's our position going into San Francisco.
Joining me on the show, Andrew K.P. Leung is China expert. We have Raymond Vickery, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and Ashok Sajanhar is former ambassador. I'm going to begin with you, Mr. Vickery. Will President Biden tame the Chinese dragon is the big question that is there on everybody's mind. What are the expectations from this meeting?
Well, thanks very much for having me, and I express my concern about the tunnel collapse disaster. I think this is a very important meeting, and the root cause of the problem here is Xi's view of the world, that Chinese expansion in terms of territorial control, both Taiwan, South China Sea, but also including the India-China border, the claims for all of our natural products and so forth. It is this problem which we have to keep from erupting into actual conflict. That's a very difficult proposition because the Chinese view it as an indication of their sovereignty, their right, their position in the world. Nevertheless, the main focus will be on restoring some sort of modicum of communication ties between the militaries. You know, the Chinese basically have cut that off after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. We have to keep this from exploding, as has Ukraine, as has Israel, Hamas, and going into a wider war. These are two nuclear powers. The kinds of devastation that could be caused by misunderstanding is virtually incalculable. It would make the 60 million people killed during the Second World War look minor in comparison. So that's the major focus, but that isn't going to be what really comes out of this. There may be some restoration of military-to-military communication, but there's a wide range of other issues upon which there can be some progress made, including climate change, including fentanyl coming to Mexico and into the United States. President Biden has a very difficult political position here because We're coming up on election year. The Republicans are adamant that he's soft on China. And so you have to be able to be a diplomat enough to normalize a relationship, but at the same time, not get caught in the political crossfire.
Yes. One point of convergence can be trade. Andrew Kipling, on the trade front too, things seem to be going south between US and China. Given the state of ties between these two countries, why do you think Xi Jinping agreed to this much anticipated meeting?
Let's be clear, between the two leaders, who has been the demandeur for this meeting. There is more demand from on the American side than on the Chinese side, because the President Biden is extremely anxious to put this relationship and not allowing this to go off the rails, because the United States has been, there is a bipartisan consensus that China is an existential threat to Americans' hegemony and American dominance, American interest on all fronts. But that's why President Biden has been seen to be pushing China left, right, and center militarily, on a trade, on technology, on semiconductors, on the South China Sea, you name it. But what Biden wants is to prevent this kind of relationship of going off the rail and spiraling into war, because war cannot be entertained by either countries, because both countries are nuclear powered with long distance delivery systems. And that's what President Biden's won, and that's why President Biden has been the demandeur. But as far as China is concerned, this rhetoric about China's expansion is flawed, because China has been consistent in its demands that, of course, Taiwan has always been regarded as a part of China. That's been recognized by the United Nations, and Taiwan is not a nation recognized by the United Nations, and the One China policy has been upheld on both sides. But the United States has been pushing China, pushing the envelope, sort of trying to create more diplomatic space for Taiwan, as if Taiwan was a separate country, and then turning Taiwan into a military porcupine. So I think that this very deep-seated differences between the two countries. But like the United States, neither the presidency wants to see that this degenerate into a war. And hence his willingness to come to San Francisco for a direct meeting, just to
Andrew Kipling, not just Beijing and Washington, which will be trying to ensure that this meeting goes well, and analysts all over the world will be looking at each and every move in that meeting. And that brings me to Ambassador Sajanhar. Ambassador Sajanhar, will the Israel-Hamas war overshadow smoothing out US-China ties? Because there is also another backdrop of another war, Russia-Ukraine war, which is ongoing. Would you say that the geopolitical situation is too overbearing?
Well, thank you very much, Marya. Yes, I think there are very many challenges on the global front. There is huge turmoil, turbulence. You have mentioned two of the particular issues which are really immediate and which need to be taken care of. Those two issues will definitely be discussed, and definitely other areas like climate change, like terrorism, etc. But I think the focus definitely is going to be on bilateral issues, Marya, and how to sort of put the bilateral issues on a somewhat even keel and to give them some sort of certainty and some sort of predictability, because that is what President Biden wants, and I think that's what the world is also looking at. And the world has been very concerned, particularly as far as this our own region is concerned, Indo-Pacific is concerned, that the expansionist and aggressive policies of China have really tended to create an imbalance in the situation, whether it is the aggressiveness it has displayed against Taiwan. It is something very new that is happening in terms of sending its aircrafts into the air identification zone of Taiwan, in terms of announcing and publication of this map in which it claims so much of the territories in the South China Sea, as also 93,000 square kilometers of Indian territory. I think these are all matters of great concern to the countries in this region, and they would like that there should be some cooling down of tempers, the polarization that has taken place between China and the United States, between the East and the West, that comes down, so that people are able to focus more on dealing with the challenges within their countries and providing a better life to their own people, rather than getting engaged in such activities. We have seen Russia-Ukraine conflict since February last year, and then since last month, since October 7th, we have seen the Israel-Hamas conflict. And the world does not want more of these, even in terms of muscle flexing, because that is going to have a very adverse and a deleterious impact on global economy, particularly developing countries.
I'm going to take the discussion forward. I would request all the panelists to stay with us, because remember, US is hosting the annual APEC Summit of world leaders for the first time since 2011. Leaders from the 21-member Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group will gather in San Francisco to talk about how to better trade and economic growth across the Pacific region. The goal for this year's summit is to try to make APEC economies more resilient, particularly in the face of growing climate issues and following a global pandemic that killed millions of people and strained supply chains. India is attending the summit as an invitee. It holds an observer status. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in fact leading this delegation. Since 2015, India has been pushing for APEC membership. It meets all the criteria needed and offers a lot, as well as the fifth largest global economy. India's position as a key economic and maritime power can add heft to this body. It also runs several transnational infra projects in the region that can benefit APEC. As India moves away from protectionism to liberalization, it offers huge markets and a massive labor force. Before we do a deep dive into India at APEC, here's my colleague Parmeshwar Bawa explaining what APEC is all about.
APEC stands for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and it's a forum to promote trade, investment and economic development among nations around the Pacific Ocean. Now, the group actually started with 12 members back in 1989, but has since grown to 21, which includes China, Russia, Japan, the United States and Australia as well. Now, these member nations pack a lot of punch. They account for 62% of global GDP and nearly half the world's trade as well. But one has to acknowledge that this forum has limited scope. It's centered on trade and the economy, there's no military component, and it was not forged by a world-altering event like a war. It technically has member economies rather than countries. That allows room for participation by both China-ruled Hong Kong and self-ruled Taiwan. India, as you know, is an observer nation. But the main event of this summit is unfolding on the sidelines. A meeting between US President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping. Now, in terms of political expectations and economic implications, with Taiwan's 2024 elections looming, China seeks assurances from the United States against fostering pro-independence sentiments. Additionally, China aims to ease tariffs and export controls on advanced semiconductors. But as Joe Biden and Xi Jinping engage, markets await signals amid ongoing geopolitical dynamics, hoping for a positive impact amidst broadening uncertainties globally. We are also likely to witness friction over the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. The variety of nations involved in this summit have strong views on both sides of the conflict, of the war. Now, typically, at the close of a summit, there is some kind of joint statement by all the nations. But that's not a given this year, in part because of these differences.
Let me go back to the panelists and a quick word from you, Raymond Vickery. The perception of India as a protectionist economy has changed, but countries like China will still try to stall this inclusion. How can India overcome these hurdles?
Well, I think it's perfectly clear that the United States has for decades wanted India to be a part of APEC. Unfortunately, China has been the drag in terms of admission of India, saying that it hasn't gone far enough in reforms, which in a way is really ironic in view of China's very hefty participation of the government in directing the economy in China. I also would say that there has been some reluctance on the part of India, really, in terms of meeting criteria in particularly the whole business about we're going to have protection of certain areas of the economy. But there is no question that now is the time for India to join APEC. It is a mechanism, although flawed certainly, but it is a mechanism to be able to have one of the greatest incentives for peace, which is economic engagement. So I would hope that the progress could be made and that there could even be an announcement of India's accession to APEC this time around.
Okay. So what about China? How is China viewing something which will which is almost inevitable? Because given the position that India has globally in this new world system, how is China viewing something that is going to happen?
I don't think that China regards the India accession as a threat, because the fact remains that China is the largest trading partner for 128 countries around the world. Is deeply embedded in the world supply and value chain. 128 countries compared with only 58 for the United States. So China is much more deeply embedded in the whole world supply and value chain, and this is unlikely to change by any kind of decoupling or de-risking or whatever you call it. But as far as India is concerned, it's quite ironic that, of course, APEC is nothing compared to the largest trading bloc in the world, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP. India actually, after years of negotiating for entry, have chosen to drop out of the world's largest trading bloc, accounting for a third of the world's GDP and a third of the world's population. And the APEC is more about politics in a way, even though it's about trade. But as suggested earlier, India is ambivalent about entirely free trade, and that's the reason why it chose to withdraw from the RCEP. But as far as China is concerned, I don't think China is rattled in any way. China's deeply entrenched in the global and supply and value system. But I think that China wants peace. Because China doesn't want war, because war is no good for China's trajectory. And above all, China wants a more inclusive world rather than kind of creating kind of small circles, excluding others, and trying to ostracize some countries on the part of ideology. But basically,
I have just enough time for Ashok Sajjanhar. Ambassador Sajjanhar, how does an APEC membership really benefit India?
I think India will get another platform, another forum to connect with its partners. And in that sense, when you are talking about Asia Pacific, India is a very integral part of Asia. Nowadays we are using for the broader concept of the Indo-Pacific. But even if you are referring to as Asia Pacific, India is a very integral component of that. Today, India is the 5th largest economy. It is the fastest growing major economy. It is scheduled to become the 3rd largest economy in a few years. So I think it is anachronistic that a trade body which speaks of Asia Pacific, that it does not have India on its rolls. So definitely India should be there. And I think as far as China is concerned, and one of the reasons why, what the gentleman is saying that India moved out of RCEP is because there are such huge non-tariff barriers as far as China is concerned, that they don't permit, there are so many areas in which India has comparative advantage, but because of the NTBs that China has, India is not able to penetrate, India is not able to get an access in that market. And even under the RCEP, China was unwilling to open up its market to Indian products. So even though we started negotiating in 2012, we had to in 2018, 6-7 years after very sincere and serious negotiations, we did not join. But definitely as far as APEC is concerned, India should be on the body because that is a place where policies are decided. It might not be a trade agreement as such.
And it benefits the body itself because India is the 5th largest economy in the world. All poised to become the 3rd largest very soon. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew K.P. Leong, Raymond Vickery and Ashok Sajanhar. That's all from me. We are putting that debate on ndtv.com. I'll be seeing you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.